What if I told you the very reason you keep breaking your promises to yourself is because a part of you wants to stay broken, not consciously, not logically, but deep down, buried beneath every New Year's resolution, every Monday morning restart, every whispered, "I'll do better tomorrow." There's a shadow, and that shadow knows exactly how to keep you stuck. Now imagine this. It's 2 a.m. Your room is quiet, but your mind is screaming. You're lying there, eyes open, heart heavy, not because of what you did today, but because of everything you didn't do. Again, you said you'd wake up early. You didn't. You said you'd work out. You didn't. You said you'd stop scrolling, stop wasting time, stop lying to yourself. But here you are, again. And in that silence, a subtle ache grows inside your chest, not just regret, not just shame, something deeper, something existential, like the sinking realization that you're slowly becoming a person you don't respect. Here's the paradox no one talks about. You want discipline, you crave it. You think it's the missing piece to the life you were meant to live, and yet, every time you get close, you sabotage yourself. Why? Why would someone knowingly destroy the very habits that would save them? Why do we read books on willpower, watch videos about focus, set alarms and reminders and vision boards, only to abandon it all for a donut and a dopamine hit? Why is it easier to keep commitments to your boss than it is to keep promises to yourself? Here's the ugly truth that discipline exposes. You are not lazy, you are at war with yourself. Because discipline isn't just a behavior, it's a betrayal of who you've been. The moment you choose structure over chaos, growth over comfort, long-term over short-term, you're not just changing habits, you're killing a part of yourself. The part that feeds on comfort, safety, familiarity, the child inside you who just wants to be held, not pushed, and that part doesn't die quietly. It fights, it bargains, it seduces you. Just 5 more minutes. You deserve a break. You've been doing so well lately. It learns your language. It mimics your logic. It wears the mask of reason, but it's lying. And the worst part, you believe it, over and over again. You don't lack discipline. You lack internal loyalty. You say you want a better life, but the moment things get hard, you side with your comfort. You side with your old self. And that's what makes discipline feel impossible. Because it's not just about what you do, it's about who you identify with when no one's watching. Let me ask you something deeper. When was the last time you trusted yourself completely? Not just to finish a task or check a box, but to rise above your impulses, to stand firm in discomfort, to fight for your future self, even when today hurts. You see, everyone talks about discipline like it's some external force, a morning routine, a calendar hack, a productivity app. But those are just tools, decorations on a crumbling foundation. True discipline is forged in the dark, when you're tired, alone, unmotivated, and tempted. It's not a strategy, it's a decision, and it's not made once. It's made every day, 1,000 times over. But here's the catch. To truly master discipline, you have to confront the terrifying possibility that part of you doesn't want to succeed, because success comes with a cost, and most people aren't willing to pay it. Not with their time, not with their comfort, and certainly not with their identity. Discipline requires death, the death of excuses, the death of victimhood, the death of your old self. Are you ready to bury him? Are you willing to kill the version of you that craves ease, validation, short-term pleasure? Because if not, then no planner, no coach, no motivational video will save you. You'll keep circling the same habits, the same guilt, the same broken cycle over and over again. But if you're ready to look in the mirror and say, "This ends with me," then everything changes. Because beneath the chaos, there is order. Beneath the failure, there is discipline. And beneath your doubt, there is power. You just have to dig deeper than you ever have before. So the question remains, not whether you want discipline. The real question is, are you willing to become the kind of person who doesn't need motivation to act? Here's the trap. You think your failure to stay disciplined is just a lack of motivation or willpower. But what if it goes deeper into how your mind was wired, how society conditioned you, and how your identity is still tethered to something you're afraid to confront? Discipline isn't just about habits, it's about power. And most people, without realizing it, have been trained to give theirs away. Let's go back, way back. As a child, you were rewarded for compliance. Sit still, get a sticker. Obey the rules, get praised. Follow orders, be a good boy or good girl. You learned early the system rewards predictability, not inner strength. You were never taught how to master yourself, only how to obey others. And so, your relationship with discipline was poisoned from the start. Here it became about approval, not autonomy. You didn't learn discipline as self-respect. You learned it as people-pleasing. You learned to act when someone was watching, not when no one was. Now you're an adult. No more stickers. No more stars on the fridge. Just a life that quietly falls apart when no one is there to keep you in check. So what do? You seek out more structure, more systems. You follow gurus. You copy routines. You download habit trackers. And for a while, it works. You feel in control, but underneath, something still pulls at you. A quiet rebellion. That same child inside you who was forced to perform starts resisting, not out of laziness, but out of self-preservation. Because somewhere in your subconscious, discipline still feels like submission, and a part of you would rather fail on your own terms than succeed on someone else's. This is what Carl Jung would call the shadow, the repressed part of your psyche that you deny, but which quietly drives your behavior. Your shadow doesn't want to be controlled. It wants to be heard. And if you try to discipline it with brute force, rigid schedules, endless rules, perfectionism, it fights back harder through procrastination, through self-sabotage, through burnout. That's why your discipline keeps collapsing. You're trying to dominate your shadow instead of integrating it. And here's where Nietzsche enters the conversation. He once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." You want discipline? Then you need to find your why. Not the superficial one. Not "I want a six-pack." Not "I want to make more money." Those are desires, not reasons. You need a why that punches you in the gut. A why that makes you cry. A why that feels holy. Without that, your discipline will always be fragile, because without meaning, effort becomes suffering, and the mind is wired to avoid suffering. But here's the philosophical problem. We live in a culture that numbs meaning. We chase quick hits of pleasure, dopamine, distraction, status. We're surrounded by artificial goals and external validation. We're taught to look outward for answers, never inward for depth. Arthur Schopenhauer called this the pendulum of pain and boredom. He said we swing between the suffering of wanting more and the dullness of having it. Modern life keeps you oscillating, never still, never satisfied. And that's the root of your fractured discipline. You're trying to build something steady in a world that thrives on making you restless. Your brain is constantly hijacked. Algorithms know what you crave before you do. Advertisements prey on your insecurities. Apps are designed to bypass your logic and hijack your impulses. You are not undisciplined. You are outnumbered. Every time you reach for your phone instead of your goals, it's not just a lack of self-control. It's a neurological assault. Dopamine spikes from infinite scrolling train your brain to expect instant rewards. Over time, the neural pathways that connect effort with satisfaction begin to erode, and you start needing stimulation instead of seeking purpose. This is what Aldous Huxley warned about in Brave New World, not a society ruled by fear, but one ruled by pleasure. A world where people willingly trade freedom for comfort, where discipline is no longer necessary, because nobody dreams big enough to need it. That's the most dangerous part. If you're not careful, the world will shrink your life down to the size of your cravings, and you'll mistake comfort for peace, indulgence for happiness, routine for identity. But deep inside you, something still aches. A quiet, painful knowing that you were meant for more than this loop. This is where Viktor Frankl comes in. He survived the Holocaust, watched people lose everything, their homes, their families, their names. But he noticed something strange. The ones who survived longest weren't the strongest. They were the ones who had a reason, a purpose, a meaning. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Your problem is not the lack of a gym plan or time-blocking schedule. Your problem is that you haven't made discipline personal yet. It's still something you do, not something you are. And until you see discipline as a sacred expression of self-respect rather than a punishment, performance, or productivity tool, you'll never make it last. So the next time you skip your routine, the next time you lie in bed and break your own promise, don't ask, 'What's wrong with me?' Ask instead, 'What part of me still believes I'm not worth the effort? What narrative have I inherited that keeps me obedient to weakness? And what truth am I avoiding because it would force me to finally grow?' The answers are not easy. They require you to unlearn, to dig, to suffer with intention, to build meaning where the world has handed you noise. But once you do, discipline stops being a cage. It becomes a key, and that key unlocks something powerful. Not just the ability to act without motivation, but the ability to become someone you never thought you could be. Now let's talk about what happens when you don't. What happens when you ignore all this and keep living like discipline is optional. You don't notice it at first. It starts in the smallest of moments. The snoozed alarm, the skipped workout, the dessert you said you wouldn't eat, the task you pushed to tomorrow. One choice, then another. One compromise, then a few more. And before you know it, something inside you begins to erode. Not dramatically, quietly. That's the danger of undisciplined living. It doesn't destroy you in one blow. It wears you down until you no longer recognize the difference between who you are and who you were supposed to become. You start tolerating yourself. That's the first consequence. You no longer expect greatness from yourself. You just hope to get through the day. You start saying things like, "I'm doing my best," even when you know it's a lie. You start calling survival success. You lower the bar until you can step over it half asleep. And the worst part? No one notices. No alarms go off. No one calls you out, because the world is full of people who've already given up on themselves. They'll applaud your mediocrity because it validates their own. But deep down, something in you protests. That quiet ache again. The guilt of unused potential. A kind of psychological inflammation, your soul reacting to self-betrayal. This is where the second consequence creeps in. Resentment. You start resenting others. The people who have what you want, not because they're lucky, but because they're disciplined. And that discipline reflects back to you everything you've avoided. You start telling yourself stories. They probably had help. They don't have my responsibilities. They're not dealing with what I'm dealing with. But what you're really doing is protecting your ego, hiding from the brutal truth that success is not accidental. It's built on thousands of small invisible sacrifices. And those sacrifices, you've been dodging them. Why? Because short-term comfort is addictive. And like any addiction, it warps your mind. Neuroscience shows us that repeated exposure to instant gratification reshapes the brain. Every skipped responsibility, every shortcut, every hit of easy pleasure rewires your reward system. The more you give in, the more you need to give in to feel okay. Your threshold for effort decreases. Your resistance to discomfort plummets. You become, quite literally, weaker. Not in muscle, in will. Psychologists call this ego depletion. Your reduced ability to make good decisions over time due to over-reliance on easy choices. But it's not just a mental drain, it's an identity shift. You start believing the voice that says, "This is just who I am." That's the third consequence, self-concept erosion. Your subconscious writes a story about you based on your behavior. Skip enough workouts, and your brain stops saying, "I didn't work out." It starts saying, "I'm not someone who works out." Procrastinate enough, and your brain doesn't say, "I delayed a task." It says, "I'm a procrastinator." Your actions become your identity, and that identity becomes your prison. You start choosing tasks based on what matches your self-image instead of what moves your life forward. And you start avoiding people, opportunities, and goals that feel too big for you. Why? Because discipline builds confidence. And without it, self-doubt becomes your religion. And then comes the most dangerous consequence of all: emotional numbness. At first, your lack of discipline makes you feel guilty. But over time, guilt turns to apathy. The pain dulls. The urgency fades. You stop feeling the cost of your decisions. You become emotionally desensitized to your own failure. This is what Jean-Paul Sartre meant when he said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." When you stop choosing, you stop becoming. When you stop becoming, you start decaying. And when that decay becomes normal, you lose something sacred. Your sense of possibility. Your imagination starts shrinking. You no longer see yourself writing that book, starting that business, becoming that person. You no longer feel worthy of the future you once dreamed of. You convince yourself it was never meant to be. But that's not true. The truth is, you buried your potential beneath 1,000 tiny decisions, and each of those decisions was a fork in the road. Not a failure, a betrayal. Because you knew. You always knew. And now you live in a world of almosts, almost disciplined, almost successful, almost fulfilled. A life filled with phantom versions of who you could have been. You start living through distractions. You scroll endlessly, not because you're entertained, but because it's easier than thinking. You consume content that reminds you of who you want to be, without ever becoming it. You chase the feeling of progress, instead of progress itself. That's the final layer of this trap. Simulation over substance. We've created a world where watching others be disciplined feels like being disciplined, where planning replaces doing, where aesthetics replace action. And the longer you live in that world, the more detached you become from your power. Discipline is no longer a choice. It becomes an event, a dramatic Monday restart, a January ritual, a YouTube binge fueled by guilt. But the quiet, daily discipline, the kind that builds empires and rewires identities, that dies, unless you intervene. Because make no mistake, the price of undisciplined living is not just lost time. It's the slow, silent disintegration of who you are. You'll still breathe. You'll still smile. You'll still function. But inside, a part of you will always feel dead. That's the real cost. Not failure. Not embarrassment. But the unbearable weight of unlived potential. Now here's the good news. If your lack of discipline can shape you into someone you don't respect, then the presence of discipline can resurrect someone you forgot you could become. But you can't do it by copying morning routines or chasing hacks. You have to go deeper. You have to rebel. Enough. You've lived under the rule of your lower self long enough. The one who flinches from discomfort. The one who rationalizes failure. The one who sabotages anything that threatens its control. You've let that voice drive the car for years. And where has it taken you? Nowhere worth staying. It's time to rebel, but not in the way the world defines rebellion. Not through rage, destruction, or performative defiance. Yule's rebellion is quieter, more dangerous. It happens in the dark, in the silence, when no one is watching. It begins the moment you choose to take your power back from your impulses. The world won't celebrate it. No fireworks, no applause. But it's the most radical thing you will ever do. To choose sovereignty over slavery. To say, I don't negotiate with weakness anymore. That's where the shift begins. Discipline, true discipline, is not about punishment. It's about ownership. It's not self-denial. It's self-respect. You are not restricting yourself. You are refusing to be ruled by a version of you that doesn't give a damn about your future. That's the rebellion. Let me tell you something. No one else will. You don't need more information. You don't need another productivity guru, another calendar system, another atomic habit. You need to make a decision, not an emotional one. Not the kind you make after a motivational video, only to fall off 3 days later. A sacred decision. The kind of decision that says, I will become someone my future self doesn't have to recover from. How? Start by destroying the illusion of readiness. You will never feel like it. You're not supposed to. Your biology is built for survival, not greatness. Greatness is unnatural. It must be engineered. So stop waiting for the mood to strike. Strike without it. Winston Churchill once said, "To each, there comes a moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and asked to do a great thing. Their tragedy is that they are unprepared." The tragedy is not that people fail. The tragedy is that they wait to feel prepared. You want to change your life? Then stop preparing. Start moving. Pick one thing, just one, and do it daily, no matter what. Discipline is not built in grand gestures. It's built in boring, consistent rebellion. Think of it this way. Every time you act without motivation, you weaken your inner tyrant. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you rewrite your identity. Every time you choose long-term over short-term, you become dangerous to everything that wants to keep you small. It doesn't have to be massive. 10 push-ups, 5 minutes of journaling, waking up at the time you said you would. It's not about the size, it's about the signal. Each small act sends a message to your subconscious. I am no longer available for mediocrity. Over time, those signals become stories. Those stories become beliefs. Those beliefs become behavior. And that behavior becomes you. Want an example? Look at the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius ran the Roman Empire and still journaled every night to check his emotions. Epictetus was born a slave and still trained his mind daily like a warrior. Their lives were full of chaos, temptation, distraction, but they chose discipline, not because it was easy, but because it was honorable. And that's the shift. Stop chasing results. Start chasing honor. You don't work out to look good. You do it because keeping your word is honorable. You don't wake up early to be productive. You do it because owning your day is honorable. You don't eat clean to impress anyone. You do it because treating your body with respect is honorable. Once you see discipline as honor, everything changes. You stop trying to negotiate with your lower self. You stop letting mood dictate motion. You stop making excuses that insult your potential. But this rebellion requires vigilance. It's not one war, it's 1,000 tiny battles every day. And most of them happen in secret. Oh, no one will see the mornings when you get up early with no reward. No one will clap when you turn down the junk food. No one will write headlines about your quiet war against comfort. But over time, your life will speak for itself. You'll walk differently. Think differently. Your eyes will tell a story most people can't understand, the story of someone who fought for themselves and won. And the best part, you'll stop needing motivation because you'll start craving respect from yourself. That's when you know the rebellion has succeeded. Because here's the truth most people never realize. You can live your whole life under the illusion that discipline is hard. But you know what's harder. Living in regret. Looking back and realizing you spent your best years obeying your weakest instincts. Knowing you had the chance to become someone powerful and chose to be comfortable instead. That's the price of surrender. So if you're tired of losing, if you're tired of letting yourself down, if you're tired of living under the rule of your impulses, then choose rebellion. Not once, every day. No matter how small, no matter how boring, make the hard choice. Honor yourself. Build the life your lower self is terrified of, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Now we come to the final piece, the deepest truth, the realization that will change how you see all of this, the breakthrough that makes sense of every struggle, every relapse, every war you've ever fought with yourself. Are you ready? You've tried everything, the schedules, the hacks, the habits. You've waged war on your distractions. You've tried to kill your laziness with discipline. You've suffered, failed, started again. And maybe, for a while it worked, but something still feels missing, doesn't it? Here's the final truth, the one no one tells you. Discipline isn't the goal. You were never meant to become a machine. You were meant to remember who you are, because at the core of discipline isn't control, it's alignment. Not forcing your way through life like a soldier obeying orders, but living in such deep alignment with your values, your vision, and your truth, that breaking discipline would feel like betraying your soul. Let that sink in. The most powerful people in the world don't try to be disciplined. They live in such radical clarity of purpose that anything less than discipline becomes disgusting. They don't have to fight themselves every morning because they know who they are. And once you know who you are, discipline becomes the natural consequence of that identity. Not something you do, something you are. The final war then is not between you and laziness. It's between you and disconnection. You've been trying to force behavior while ignoring belief. You've been obsessed with action while neglecting meaning. But discipline without meaning is just control, and control will always burn out. Viktor Frankl said, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." This is why you relapse. This is why you collapse. Because your habits aren't anchored to anything sacred. But imagine this. You wake up tomorrow and something's different. You don't check your phone. You don't scroll. You don't stall. You just sit there, breathe, and you ask yourself not what you need to do, but who you are becoming. You see a version of yourself in your mind's eye, not polished, not perfect, but powerful. Not because of what they have, but because of how they live. And in that moment, it clicks. Discipline is devotion, not to some rigid standard, not to ego, not to an aesthetic, but to something higher. Maybe it's your future family. Maybe it's a mission. Maybe it's a younger version of you who never got the love they deserved. And now it's your job to protect them by becoming who they needed. Whatever it is, it has to be bigger than you. Because when discipline is just about you, it crumbles the moment pain enters the room. But when it's about something sacred, something eternal, pain becomes fuel. That's the shift. You stop chasing discipline like a tactic. You start embodying it like a vow. Not because you're afraid to fail, but because you're unwilling to abandon yourself ever again. And from that place, everything becomes simpler. You don't need motivation when you're loyal to your future. You don't need hacks when your values are non-negotiable. You don't need external pressure when your inner world is louder than the noise outside. This is how legends are made. Not through productivity, but through integrity. Think of it like this. Imagine standing at the edge of your life, your deathbed. You look back at everything. The failures, the successes, the moments no one saw. What matters? Not your income, not your aesthetics, not how many followers you had. What matters is whether you kept your word to yourself. Did you live like someone who honored their potential? Did you act in alignment with the person you claimed you wanted to be? Or did you sell yourself out for comfort, ease, and approval? That's what discipline really is. It's not punishment. It's not pressure. It's not suffering. It's love. The kind that says, "I won't abandon myself again." The kind that says, "I deserve better." The kind that says, "I was built for more," because you were. You weren't born to scroll your life away. You weren't born to lie in bed regretting everything you didn't do. You weren't born to fear effort, to avoid pain, to chase pleasure like a slave. You were born to create, to build, to sacrifice, to love yourself so fiercely that you become dangerous to your former self. That is the final, most powerful realization. Discipline isn't about what you do. It's about what you refuse to tolerate anymore. It's about the moment you say, "I'm done betraying myself. I'm done living like I don't matter. I'm done delaying the life I know I'm capable of living." It's the moment you stop asking, "Can I?" and start declaring, "I will." That's when it all changes. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you become unshakable. And that version of you, they don't need a YouTube video. They don't need a motivational speaker. They don't even need a reminder. They remember who they are. So the next time you're tired, the next time you want to quit, the next time your old self tries to crawl back in, don't fight. Just whisper, "I know what you want, but I remember who I am," and then act. Not for perfection, not for applause, but for truth, because truth is discipline's final form. And once you live there, you're free. Forever. Ooh.